Hello everyone. Welcome to Cyborg Camp. This is really, really exciting. This conference happened accidentally. I was on Twitter in 2008, and I think Chris Krug and Dave Olson said something about, you should have a cyborg camp. I had gone to lunch. I was at a small startup company. I had gone to lunch, and by the time I came back, there was a website and a wiki and 7 volunteers and a location and sponsors and like 20 other things that were set up, and t-shirts, and somebody made a logo, and then somebody made a timeline, and I said, well, I guess this conference has to happen. And since then, it's been in different places. Next year, it will be at MIT in 2014. So it's amazing, and I'm honored that you guys are all here. And I'm frankly a little bit nervous, even though I've spoken in front of like 5,000 people before. You guys are fantastic, except for this squeaky thing that's happening. Hold on. Should I keep talking to see if the squeak goes away? Okay. All right, I'm going to talk about squeaks and where they came from, and now where they're going. Seems like they're on the decline these days. I wouldn't invest in squeaks, guys. Yeah, good? Yeah, great. Okay. All right, I'm going to talk to you about from solid to liquid to air, cyborg anthropology, and the future of the interface. But could you all just put your phones up in the air really quickly? I want to just take a really quick picture of everyone and their phone. Keep them up in the air even though it might hurt your arms. Hold on. There we go. Excellent, excellent. So the faster you raise your phones in the air, the more cyborg you are. Some of you are more cyborg-like than others. You're probably the most cyborg audience I've ever seen, actually. Those phones went up really fast. You'd definitely win in a Wild West battle. So really, we're all cyborgs, but it's not really that we're that we're RoboCop or Terminator or anything like that. We have this symbiotic interaction with our technology, and it's really that we don't need to have it embedded into our hands or our heads in order to be cyborgs. It's just that we interface with it through our eyes and traditionally with our hands, and it's really just this external appendage that we have. So the actual definition of a cyborg is from this 1960 paper on space travel, and the definition is an organism to which exogenous components have been added for the purpose of adapting to new ambient spaces. Basically, somebody in a spacesuit has put some exogenous components on them in order to adapt to a new environment, because humans are strange and they like to be able to be the equivalent of a fish one day and a bird the other by jumping into an airplane. And they do this very well. We've basically externalized our evolution so that we can evolve very, very quickly. And our original tools, if you look at them, they're really extensions of our physical selves. They don't really change over time. The form and function and shape and purpose of this tool from 3,000 years stayed pretty much the same. It's an extension of the fist. It helps you to hit something. If it breaks, you can make another one. If this was something that you had to evolve for 2 million years and you suddenly broke it, well, you'd have to wait to reproduce again before another one of these tools showed up because it's attached to you. And that stayed very similar for a long time. And so what makes the era that we live in very interesting, although we have started with cave paintings and externalizing information mentally, is that we have more and more of these devices out there that are technically larger on the inside than they are on the outside. Their form doesn't follow their function. They don't look like what they do. They are completely transient in how they're shaped and what they look like and how they evolve, and they're evolving much more quickly than the physical tools that we've been used to. And they're basically extensions of our mental selves. So if you look at an extension of a physical self like this tool, and you look at an extension of the mental self like whatever's going on here with this giant machine, when the UNIVAC came out and when early computers came out, they were the size of a gymnasium, and now they fit into our pockets. And they do weird things, like they beep and cry, and we have to pick them up and soothe them back to sleep. And we have to plug them in at night because they get hungry. They only last for 1 or 2 years, or they turn against us and make us look dumb or out of date. And they're very strange things. We didn't really have them before. The closest thing we had is a car. If you look at car ads and mobile device ads, they're pretty much the same. It's like sleek and new and like shiny and steel, and check out this design. This can take you places. And literally, the phone is Well, literally a car takes you places, and metaphorically a phone takes you places, but in reality you're going somewhere. And there's a lot of different ads now about like extending your mind and things like that with phones. So they're finally, you know, it's finally becoming the equivalent of something that's very much a luxury item. So traditional anthropologists, technically, they go out to another country. They usually go to the site of the anthropological other, somebody that's not them in a different country. And they go and they look at all the kinships and tribal relations, and they look at the objects and they say, huh, how fascinating these people are, you know, the stereotype of anthropologists. And they write a little paper, and then they bring it back to the first world, and then they talk about it. And it's not often read outside of that world. Now, that's a really, really narrow view from like, you know, the 1930s to the 1960s, but that's really the idea, is that there's this other, and somebody's finding how interesting it is and how different it is, and showing these differences. There aren't that many tribes that haven't been looked at. So when I was writing my thesis, I was like, well, what do I have left to discover? Like, I can't just go to some other country and look at people and objectify them and write some paper about it. And you know, that era of anthropology is almost over. And even if you do that, like, is that actually disrupting, you know, what the tribes are doing or what these native peoples are doing? And so I thought that I would look at cyborg anthropology instead, because it's about taking a step back and saying, what's really happening to us when we use this technology? How is it affecting, you know, people's brains as they grow up? What does it mean to click on buttons all the time and get information instead of going to the library? How is that changing our culture? Because it happens in this slow way, it's technically slow and fast at the same time. It just kind of blends into everyday life. And it's very hard to step back when every morning you wake up and look at your phone and check your email and then get to work and then check your email. I kind of think of cell phones as the new cigarettes. If you're on pause, you can use your phone to look like, you know, say you're at a bus stop, you know, you would use your phone so that you don't look like you're just standing there doing nothing. Like, the idea of standing there doing nothing anymore is not even reasonable. It's like, you need to be doing something. You need to like be paired off with a device. And when somebody talks on the phone, it's like next to you, it's like 1.5 people are there. It's like somebody who's like this big and they're sitting next to you and they're crowding your space, even though one of them is, you know, stored in the cloud somewhere. So I started researching if anybody had thought about this, and there have been lots of people over time who've thought of this. There's many articles that people can read, but one of the ones that I found that doesn't have that much documentation around it is the Macy meetings. In 1953, it's these cyberneticists and anthropologists who came together, and they said, hey, we're really interested in what happens when these machines aren't used for military purposes anymore, and when they're really small and when they're in people's pockets, and how is that going to change the social fabric of the world? So we're going to have a series of meetings that are probably 40 or 50 years too soon, and then talk about this. It's hard to get the transcripts from these meetings. A lot of them aren't very well documented, but you had, you know, some of the founders of cybernetics, you had some of the top anthropologists in the world going to these meetings. Should I continue to talk very loud? Can you all hear me? Okay, great. Wait, yes? No? No? Oh. Hello? Great. Thank you. Cyborg problems. Speaking of which, it's never been so perfectly timed. I swear I didn't mean to do that. All right, I'm going to go over some problems. If you have a device that's larger on the inside than it's on the outside, you have this kind of automatic production of space that happens. Unlike a house, which you can fill up with a certain amount of objects and then it's actually full and you can't move, you can fill up a hard drive, or now with cloud computing, a bunch of random servers, you can fill it up with whatever you want. And there's space that just keeps getting made. If your hard drive runs out, you can store it on Google Drive or Dropbox. And so I started looking at if anyone had done an art project around this. And this is actually a campaign for Maxtor hard drives where they took one laptop and 8 years of digital photos and they printed it out. And this is this massive, massive pile of all of these photos that have been printed out. And really what it means is that, you know, I always think of people as basically hoarders, right? What does a hoarder do? They collect cats and newspapers and a bunch of items that don't have anything to do with anything. And what do we do on the internet? We collect news articles, random pictures, and lots of cats. But because it doesn't fill up a house and doesn't stink, or maybe we end up stinking while we do that, because it doesn't fill up a house and it doesn't, and it's basically not visible. So I wonder how many of us are actually invisible hoarders or tabaholics and thinking that we want all this information all the time, but in reality we can't do anything with it. And that because whenever you put something into a computer, it doesn't get any heavier. You have no tangible footprint of what you're actually, engorging on, right? It's easier now to put data into a device than it is to get it out. It's much easier to take, 200 digital photos than it is to take a bunch of manual photos because they actually take up space and you have to develop them. And so you have these kind of issues of scale that are going on where if your hard drive fails, you feel this immeasurable loss, but you don't really understand it's because you lost like 2 rooms full of hoarded stuff in your house that you can't possibly get rid of, because every time you touch the digital object, you realize that you really want to keep that thing because you might use it in the future at some point. That's a very much of a hoarding personality. So I wanted to look at trying to print something out. And when I looked at the Facebook wall when that came out, I said, well, what if I took my own Facebook wall and printed it the size of a wall and put it up? So this was at the BAMF Center. And I had people walk by it, and it was a total privacy violation. It was basically, here's my wall, and you can read every single post on it, and this is completely in the public. And this was only a month worth of data, and it filled up an entire room. And it was kind of scary, actually. And so I thought of, well, there must be something else out there that's similar to this. This can't be very unique. And then I thought, well, yeah, so the pharaohs had basically the equivalent of Facebook walls, right? They were important, they had all this minutia. This guy gave this guy a bunch of corn, and this guy today got in this fight with this guy, and then this guy says that you're a jerk, and then he invaded, at a pharaoh scale, right? And so now we're all these like little mini pharaohs with our own little temples of information and our own Facebook walls full of minutia, except these are stored in some sort of ether, in servers and in electricity, and these are stored in stone and will last for 3,000 years. So is any of that very useful? I really wonder if all of it were to go away, since it's not really there, if there might be some sort of digital dark age that happens. That we're all making this new Library of Alexandria, and it's not really printed out into stone or steel. The Long Now Foundation is trying to do a little bit of that with limited funding. The Web Archive is trying to do that with limited funding, but they're storing it in the same way that it was created. They're storing it still in ones and zeros. So how can one archive this information? And is it worth archiving? I mean, what parts of it should we archive? Should we archive the page on Wikipedia on Steve Colbert? I don't know what we should be doing. So those are some of the problems that I started to kind of come up with as I went through, what's it like to be on the web. The other issue, actually a guy with an old phone, you can't really see. One of the other issues is that if you keep a device for too long, it turns against you. I heard the story in Venezuela of this guy who got on a bus, on a public bus, and he had an old phone with him, like an old cordless phone, and he was carrying he was carrying it on the bus, and all these people started making fun of him, and so he had to kind of hide it. And it's really kind of upsetting that you have to change your behavior in order to have an old device hanging out with you. Or the idea of you break your device, suddenly you can't press a button and hear all the way on the other side of the world. It's funny because we're all superhumans until we run out of batteries, and when we run out of batteries, then we're just normal people and we have to borrow somebody else's kind of cyborg network. When you put information into a device, you basically get a hyperlink from your mind to where it's stored in the device. And you can have all sorts of these memories going on at the same time. You can have memories on Twitter and memories in emails, and it gets pretty intense after a while because you have to sort through all of that information. I really think of that like persistent paleontology. You're basically a paleontologist, and the field site is your email account, and you're constantly digging for new pieces of information or old pieces of information, and there's this fine layer of emails that just keep showing up on top of your email account again and again. Sure. There you go. And then when all of this information shows up at once, it shows up in different aspects of your life. There's no longer any definition between work and play. Play can happen at sometime during work when you get distracted. They call it cyber loafing now. Or the opposite, where you're hanging out at a bar and suddenly your boss emails you and you have to deal with it. And so there's really not these well-defined boundaries anymore that there used to be with 9-to-5 work. And neither is it that people can have a job for 40 years and have an entire career. It's just, I feel like everybody's become their own football player where they're getting traded from one company to another. And you might get a salary increase if you do, and you might move to another place. So when all of this comes together, I just call this kind of an architecture of panic. This one woman came up with this name email apnea. She actually found out that people hold their breath while they're checking their email. It's very stressful. And she found herself stopping breathing. And she tried to figure this out. She called it email apnea. She said, okay, I'm going to start these breathing exercises so that when I deal with my email, I don't stop breathing. Because it's extremely stressful. Everything looks the same. It's all the same priority. And you end up just having this kind of panic attack. And it's kind of this, if in nature you were to walk into a clearing and everybody in the forest would be diametrically opposed to you and tell you some spam or that they need some information from you, and you just freeze. And I feel like that's how we feel every time we open our email accounts, although we're used to it. And when you use cell phones now, you have to kind of negotiate this temporary private space. Because the phone used to be in a room that you could actually sit in and have privacy, now I wanted to make a video of what I would call Modernday Soliloquies, which is you just hear half of somebody's phone conversation and record it, and you try to make up the other side of the conversation. But we end up getting these all the time, and the very crude notion is that having a cell phone section in a restaurant is like having a peeing section in a swimming pool. It's just this kind of, it doesn't stop, at the end of the phone. It keeps going. So this guy, you probably can't see this. This is a portable cell phone booth that this industrial engineer made. It's basically something you can wear on your head, and then it folds into a backpack. He's a great artist. And so he'd wear this around New York, and then he'd have it in his backpack, and then he'd go up to the counter to get a sandwich, and then he'd be like, oh, sorry, I have a phone call. Flip over the private cell phone booth and order while he's on the phone. We also have this concept, again, from the person who came up with email apnea of ambient intimacy. It's not that you're always around everybody, but that you always have the ability to get to somebody on the network. And if you were to print out all of the connections in your phone, it might look like this, that you have all of these people that you can access at any time, and they're just one click away. They might not always be available, but you're carrying around a miniature community with you in your pocket all the time. And so even if you're in the middle of nowhere, you might feel connected to people. And then we have the concept of the second self through Sherry Turkle, where this is the self that you're creating outside of yourself on social networks. You can either have it be your primary self, where you say, oh, I hate my boss and get fired, or you can craft it in order to create the self that you really want to be. And then you have this, along with this, you have this interface for, basically remote social grooming. And when somebody actually sends you a message, you get this really nice dopamine hit. And it's really the equivalent of, really the actual equivalent of grooming. Your brain automatically makes a connection between this interface and you actually feeling good in real life. The same with somebody attacking you on a Facebook wall. And so a lot of people don't think about the presentation of themselves in digital life. A lot of people just are themselves online. But if you kind of think about how you want to present yourself in real life, you can make this kind of cybernetic feedback loop where you can have yourself make yourself, you can have your digital self make your analog self into what you want your analog self to be, and tighten that control loop until you self-optimize. So my friend Caamp did this by selling shares of himself. He became a publicly traded person. So you can actually vote on whether he should have a vasectomy or whether he should move in with his girlfriend. And he's outsourced control of his life to his shareholders. Of course, he still has control of the questions that he asks them. But when I first met him, he was kind of slobby and totally out of shape and didn't really know what he was doing. And then he started this crazy control loop, and now he kind of looks like a politician, which is a little bit scary. So then the issue keeps coming again, because For me, it takes me, a day to do 2 tasks at this point, and I would have been able to do many more before the internet showed up, and I realized I'm extremely addicted to information. I think of information as junk food. Your stomach will tell you when it's full. We've evolved to have a stomach that says, I'm full, I can't eat anymore, I'm going to throw up. Your brain doesn't do that. Your brain can say, I'm full and has a headache, but not at like midnight when you say, I'm just going to click on 2 more links on Reddit, and then it's 4 o'clock in the morning. There's no impulse inside that allows you to say that. And so in Singapore, there was a movement called the junk sleep movement, which was, turn off your devices an hour before you go to sleep, or you will artificially think that you're awake, and all of these thoughts and memories will just keep you awake, and then you won't have enough time to slow down and have proper REM sleep, and then wake up and have a refreshed operating system, basically. And then this all comes back to digital hygiene. Are you actually practicing good digital hygiene? I hope this is kind of a dystopian look at things, but in 10 years, if at school people have to learn digital hygiene along with all of the other tasks, it's a health science thing, clean up the browser tabs, don't close Firefox every 2 weeks, and then of course, which I talked about, the information hoarding that is invisible and we can't see. And all of this comes down to intermittent reinforcement. B.F. Skinner did this research with some rats. He said, I'm going to feed these rats 3 times a day, they'll press a lever, they'll get food. The rats learned how to tell time very quickly. Okay, 3 times a day and they'll press the lever, get the food immediately, great, done, simple. And then he said, well, I'm going to just have the food arrive randomly. So he had the food arrive randomly, and the rats would just press the lever all day constantly, and they just tap, 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 because the food might show up at some point. And that's really what we do with our email accounts and Instagrams and Facebooks. We just click on them thinking that there might be more information. Most of the time there isn't, and that's why during the 4-hour work week, the guy says, check your email twice a day. He's trying to get everybody out of the Skinnerian rat trap that everybody's in. And then of course we had these kind of little techno-social training wheels, like the Tamagotchi, where these creatures that you cared for, and they basically tangled you into a web of social obligations, caring for a creature that didn't even exist. And now we have the same thing, where there's all of our friends as Tamagotchis stuck in a phone, and we have to make sure that they're fed and okay. And again, here's all the Tamagotchis in our phone that we have to take care of if we want to do anything in life and feel okay. So many of us have become these kind of Skinnerian rats. So how do we solve it? There's this great psychological effect that happens every time you get a new piece of information. It's this great dopamine hit. And that's what influences us to play games like Foursquare. Foursquare is a database game where you add more information to a giant row of data, and you add in new places if they aren't on the map, and you get points. You literally just get points, and you get to see what happened in row 2, cell A, with your friend who checked in to the spreadsheet cell next to you in the giant database. And so I started to think about what actually does that mean. There's this great conference called the Internet as Playground and Factory. Technically, we're all playing around and we're doing this for fun, but in reality, we're just working. We're adding rows to a database for a company, and we get to do that for free, and it's very interesting. So what can we do on the internet that isn't doing factory work for somebody else? Doug Rushkoff talks about this quite a bit in Program or Be Programmed. So then I thought about what's wrong with my brain. If I'm always on this information addiction, how do I basically defragment my brain? When I was little, my dad would show me how you defragment an operating system. You run the disk defragmenter, and then you watch all of the little modules on the screen and all the programs that have been fragmented actually pick themselves up and compress space so that your operating system can run faster. And so I'd go to sleep at night being like, I wonder if my brain is operating the same way like an operating system, and I have English stored here, and I have this television show stored here, I just want to clean it all up. And I'd have dreams at night where I'd have all these random things happening, and I realized, well, maybe just dreams are a mental defragmentation process for your operating system, and you wake up after having some dreams and you have a clean operating system. So this is a picture of what I used to watch all day when I was little. My parents thought I was crazy. And I realized that another way that you can do it is self-reflection. A lot of people don't just sit there staring into space. You don't have to meditate, but if you stare into space and eventually your thoughts get to you and you start to think over them, a lot of the greatest leaders in the past have had 1 or 2 days, a week or a month, where they just sit there and they think about stuff. and their brain and them kind of have a conversation, and they think about how they could do something better or go over something in the past. I don't think a lot of us do that as much anymore unless we're forced to, or there's no internet. Which there should be like a national day of outage where you just don't have any internet access for a day. See what people do. So I feel like when tech is filling every moment, you kind of have this loss of time to defragment. So one of the ways that people have been trying to avoid this is via the quantified self movement. So my favorite quote about this is, my friend John Lipkowski says, of all the newest technologies I've ever had to use for friends or dating, I've realized that I have lots of friends and I have a wife, so I don't need any of those, but the person that I know least about is myself. So he said, if there was some tech that taught me how to understand myself a little bit, this would be, reasonable. So I started doing some experiments. This is The Sims, and I started making floor plans in The Sims and running two people through it at really fast speed and tried to model them after like my partner and I. And I ran the simulation really fast, and I started to realize crappy things about my behavior. As a person, you're living life at one speed. In The Sims, you can play something at really, really fast, and you can realize, I always forget to pay the bills, and they always stick on a counter. And I looked, and yeah, sure enough, there's a giant stack of bills on my counter in real life. I looked over at The Sims, I was like, oh, this is very uncanny. And then another thing, like my partner and I would get home from work and we'd be really tired, and then there was this chair in the way, and we'd argue because there was a chair in the way, and we both just needed to use the restroom. So I was like, I wonder if I move the chair in The Sims, what will happen? So I moved the chair in The Sims, and our happiness went up. And I was like, that's interesting. So I went and I moved the chair in real life, and hey, I feel happier for some reason, and I don't know why, because you can't see it over a long period of time. So the whole idea with quantified self is that you're making something that was formerly invisible visible, and you're able to play something over time in order to understand trends and cycles. So you can get something done that then you don't just get stuck in a certain process. So then I did this thing called the Harvard Happiness Project, which it asked me like 15 minutes of survey questions every day, a bunch of times. It was awful. But I did it for 3 months because I wanted the data out of it. And I learned over time that although when people asked me if I liked my job, I said, yes, I love it. When I was actually at my job and the Harvard Happiness Project asked me how I was doing, I always reported that I hated it. And so I realized I was just lying to myself and my friends and my family, saying that I liked something that I didn't and I needed to get the hell out of there. So I did. I quit and I started a startup company, which was really, really risky. And every time I was working on this little side project, I was reporting that I was extremely happy. And so that's how I did that, which is a really strange way to do things, but it works out pretty well. And then I met my co-founder, Aaron Parecki, and he started making, you can barely see this at all, he started carrying around a GPS tracker, and he set it at 5-second intervals, and he was able to have an entire trail of everywhere he had been for like 3 or 4 years. And so when I first met him, I saw that he was driving on highways all the time, and I said, are you happy when you're on highways? He said, no. I was like, do you like driving? No. What if you moved over here? Then you could cut out 45 minutes of driving per day, 30 minutes of decision making, and like the need to eat out all the time because you don't have the time when you get home and you're tired. He said, okay. And so over time, he started like reducing his commute over time. And I think he gets an extra 20 days of work, 20 days of life back that's not in the non-space of commuting over time. So we're just kind of like hacking life in order to make things happy. I call this a programmatic approach to perfect happiness. You don't need to take it that seriously. It's just a fun mental experiment. I don't do this with every single moment of my life, but these are all just fun mental games. So 2 more sections, one on history of somebody that wanted to change all of these issues, and then another one on basically the future of the interface. So this is Steve Mann. He has this wearable computing apparatus. He's wearing a bicycle helmet, and he's got antennas sticking out of the helmet, and he has metallic gelled hair that allows him to conduct a signal. It took him about a year to meet somebody else at MIT to also wear like the 40 pounds of computing equipment that he's wearing right now. He wanted to broadcast a signal of everything he was doing at all times. He also wanted to miniaturize the television screen and put it over his eye, and he hated the idea that you should have to use computers like this. He said, computers should conform to you. You shouldn't conform to computers. When I walk through a park and I have a great idea, I want to be able to write it down right then. And if something bad happens or there's like a political issue, I want to be able to record it really instantaneously. He said, over time, this will be really small. We'll have all of this in a little handheld device and we'll be able to do all the things that I can do right now. And everyone said, of course, Steve, man, we don't really believe you at all, but you're at MIT and we can allow you to do this for a while. And they did. And so his first date with his soon-to-be wife was a body swap experiment. They both ate like lasagna dinner, and then he had a camera on his head and a heads-up display, and she had one on her head and a heads-up display, and they watched each other on the date from the perspective of each other. So he was always doing these fantastic projects that swapped things around. He also didn't like the idea of seeing other people's advertisements in the real world. He wanted to see his own information. So he and grad student James Fung found a way to discover advertising in reality, cancel it out, put a white square over it, and then put text messages on top of it. So you can actually see his wife, who's also a Borg, and is watching him through his heads-up display as he walks through Toronto. She's actually writing him a text message that says, hey, you went too far, you need to take a left on Bay Street. So, about millions of dollars of research for a fairly domestic purpose, which is fantastic. Here's some images of him canceling out a L'Oreal billboard and putting a research paper on top of it so he can read a research paper while he walks down the street. He also edits Wikipedia when he stopped at a red light. This is another one where his wife wanted to leave him a message, pick up the 2% milk. So instead of having to have a location-based service, a mobile phone, and like location-based reminders and checking where the person was all the time, she just said, anytime Steve Mann sees a Star Market logo, float this like little display on top of it that says, remember the milk. And then until he gets the milk, he'll see this everywhere. So basically, also when he goes into a supermarket, he can cancel out brands. So he doesn't see what he doesn't want to see. So he'll go into a supermarket and only see the things he needs to buy. Everything else will be blanked out, which is very efficient, although I don't think supermarkets like that at all. He also had these projects like, this is surveillance. It's the opposite of surveillance. Surveillance comes from the word to view from above, and surveillance is to view from below. He said, there are many surveillance technologies out there, but when we have handheld devices that can record video persistently, we'll have the ability to be surveillant, and that means that many people will be able to tell a story. Like during a protest, many people can tell the story of what happened during that time versus the news, which has one perspective, which is usually from a helicopter, literally from above. So Steve Mann really wanted to make this smaller and more elegant. He got pretty far. This is him with hacked My View glasses. I was supposed to bring all of these, I forgot. I apologize. I have tons of prototypes of like Google Glass. I'm really sorry. And so he would cut these glasses apart and make all these things. And he ran a class at, I don't know if he still runs it, at University of Toronto, where you actually have to make your own like Borg assemblage with like My View goggles and things like that, and take notes on it in class, People have written their entire dissertations through this service. And then of course, over time, it got smaller and smaller and lighter and lighter. And this is him in present day. You can barely see him, but it just looks basically like these glasses. You can barely see what's going on. It's super elegant, and it just took a while. But there were some issues in the way. This is the idea of persistent architecture. This is the very first computer mouse in 1963. Doug Engelbart created it as a stopover because he wanted to have people actually interact with information. But the mouse became so popular, unfortunately, that we had it for 40 years. And he was so upset. He said, one day, we were supposed to be able to touch information in the 70s, and it took us until like the iPad and the touch screen to actually be able to touch information. He thought this was really disappointing. He still is disappointed by it, and he's like 90, and he made all these different new mouses trying to get anybody to adopt something that wasn't this mouse that he made really quickly at Park Research, or at SRI. So people started making these really scary gargoyle-like devices because they wanted to be able to walk around and use a computer. This is terrifying looking. It's really terrifying looking, actually. And it would allow you to, with one hand, type on a keyboard, and you could get up to like 60 words a minute with this thing. That did not take off. This took off. This is a twiddler. It's a one-handed keyboard. You basically can chord like a guitar, and type 60 words a minute. And then if you have a heads-up display and a battery pack in a fanny pack around your waist and a leather coat with all the rest of your appliances, then you can walk down the street and look really weird, but type your research paper while you're in the park, which is great. It's being remade by a company in Canada, which is awesome, so I got to order one and play with it. There's typing programs for kids to learn how to use it. It's a really short learning curve, even though it looks really, really complicated. And it basically frees you. So this is a picture of the Borg group at MIT Media Lab. You can see there's a differentiation in the variety of Cyborg here. On the left, you can see everybody with the short leather jackets. And then you can see on the right-hand side, Thad Starner, who's working on Google Glass and was hired by Google, one of Steve Mann's students on the far right with a long cloth trench coat. It's how you can tell which generation of Borg these people are part of. And you can see more pictures of them here. Thad Starner's next to Steve Mann in the middle. You can see Sandy Pentland, and he does a thing called reality mining, which is a really interesting movement at MIT. Thad Starner's in the front, Steve Mann's in the back. I don't know who that guy is on the right, but I have to figure it out soon, if anybody knows. And then when Thad Starner went to Georgia Tech, he made a much more fashionable version of the Borg group with more updated devices, and they take these like nice portraits together. They're much more fashionable, which is why I think he was hired to work on Google Glass. And here's him working with some people with the twiddlers, he's teaching her how to use a twiddler. And then we have Google Glass. So the reason that Google Glass is interesting to me is that it, by default, is off. You have to nod to turn it on. And it's just there when you need it and not when you don't, which is the idea of calm technology. It gets out of the way when you don't need it and it's there when you do. And it has 30 or 40 years of research put into it by people like Thad Starner, who've worn this thing for 10 years straight on their head in some way or another, and have a really nice wish list for what it could be if there was enough funding behind it. People have been trying to make heads-up displays for a long time, and they've all pretty much failed. So I'm excited about Google Glass in that respect. In the same way that we freaked out about cell phones and people talking obnoxiously, we'll probably have the same thing happen with glass. There's already a term on Urban Dictionary for somebody who uses glass too much called a glass hole, where they just say, okay glass, okay glass, okay glass. We'll see how it plays out. It's going to be fantastic, like just watching these people get freaked out about it. Already the comments are like thousands long. When I tried it, I loved it. It was just very relaxing to use. And I didn't have to pull out my phone every time I wanted driving directions and almost crash my car into something. So I think it might decrease car-related deaths by directions alone. And then there's some non-visual wearable technologies. This is a haptic compass belt. It basically has piezoelectric buzzers around your waist. It always buzzes in the direction of north. And this guy wore it, and he noticed that he had a sixth sense about him. He always knew where he was and where he was with respect to other places. He wore it for 6 weeks before, when he went to sleep, he would actually feel it in his dreams. He'd be biking around in his dreams and feel the sixth sense in his dreams. And after that, he stopped wearing it. He's a little bit concerned. But if you put some driving directions into this, and it buzzed you twice, if you really needed to turn left, or once if you were approaching a turn, you wouldn't have to have any sound or sight as an input. You'd just have buzzes. It wouldn't interrupt anybody else, it wouldn't interrupt you, and you'd have the information there when you needed it. And so I'm really interested if people actually drop the sound and sight and try to go into other senses, the things that you could actually do. Of course, in order to do that, you'll need to have a really good location-based service behind the scenes. And so this is really the idea, the tenets of calm technology is that the device is off unless you need it. It's there in the background, it springs to life when something needs to be done, but in reality, it's taking all of those complex things out, and all of those buttons, and all those displays, and all of the things that make technology awkward, and putting it into a system that just allows you to live your life, and allows you to be in a park. And so I was thinking about what the next generation of this was. If we look at buttons that are solid, you have to actually change them around. If you look at our devices now, they basically have liquid screens, and you have to change the software in order to get it to change what it does. But that's much better than recoding an entire hardware button. So I thought, well, if it's solid and liquid, then just like the water cycle, it's air, of course. So what if you could draw a button in the air that's invisible, and when you went into it, it would actually trigger something? And so this is what I set out to work on. There were lots of issues with privacy, with persistent background location. There's lots of issues with battery life, mostly battery life. And I started looking at some research papers. There were plenty of them. Most people in reality hated these papers. People thought people were wasting their time. This was from 2006. It got published on a news site, and all of these people were like, this woman is wasting her time with making location-based technologies. I don't see how this is useful. And I was like, oh man, this is like 2008 that I was reading this, and I was really worried that no one would like it. And then I said, no, that's fantastic. If no one is interested in building this, then I have free reign and no one will care. So I started working on it. And I met my partner Aaron, who had this hardware GPS logger, which he hated because he always had to sync it to a computer. And he finally got this Windows Mobile 6.5 phone with GPS tracker in it, and he started taking all of his data points. And then he gave me a phone, which was a Boost mobile phone, and instead of taking information at 5-second intervals, it takes it at 30-second intervals. And I left mine on the entire time instead of turning it off whenever I left and entered a building. And so you can actually see how long I've been in a certain place around Portland. And my ankle was broken at the time, so I just put it in this ankle cast thing that I had. So it worked out pretty well. So we had completely different views of reality. One was very precise, one was really messy and edgy and jagged. And we thought, well, what can you do with this? So we started putting all these little geofences places. This is in Portland, Oregon, and basically it will tell you, if you're on a bridge, or if you're in Northwest Portland or Southeast Portland. We said, what if we made the data behind this dynamic, so you can put any data set you want into it that's formally on the web and bring it to life? And so we did. We basically thought your phone should become this remote control for reality, and it should be able to act with you on your behalf and do things to help you out and to make you more relaxed instead of get in the way all the time. And so we asked, if your app knew where it was, what could it do? Actually, let's skip that one. But the battery drain issue was in a way. So we said all we have to do, which is really hard and no one has solved before, is solve the battery issue, which in reality we just made a bunch of different tracking profiles that ramp up GPS when you get near content and ramp down GPS when you get away from content. And we kept testing it. It's not perfect, and it never will be perfect because it's the real world and there's all these edge cases. We've been living in a world of software for a long time where on the web everything can happen perfectly. You click and the click happens. In the world, if you're clicking an invisible button, there might be some random cell tower in the way. There might be there might be some feedback loop that's a big issue, and you have to file out all those edge cases. So it can't work 100% of the time, which is pretty upsetting, actually. So we had to deal with that. And as we kept building this, everybody said, I was going to all these location-based marketing conferences, and they're like, well, what we need to do is put a geofence over all the Starbucks, and then when you walk down the street, you'll get a Starbucks coupon. And I said, well, first off, if you're interested in Starbucks, you're definitely going to pay full price. You don't need a coupon. And secondly, why do you need to know that there's a Starbucks there? They're on every single street corner. So you don't need these. And so I made a drinking game. You take a shot every time somebody says Starbucks in location-based ads. And I researched, and it turned out that Starbucks already did this, in 1994, and then again in 2004. They had these location-based messages which didn't work, but cost $20 million to build. So there's so many more interesting things to do with location. There's this, so we built this software out and all these companies started using it, but one of them was a big energy drink company. And they started just getting tons and tons of downloads, and I said, okay, what the heck, what is this thing? So I download their app, and it's a race car game. And it's a race car game that you just drive around in, and then, because you've installed the app on your phone, it tells you if you're nearby a 7-Eleven. It's geofenced all of the 7-Elevens in the United States. And so I'm like, okay, I'm near 7-Eleven, and it says, go and scan a can of this drink. I'm like, oh my gosh, really? And so I go and I scan a can of the drink just to see what are people doing with this app. And it gives me more add-ons and speed boosters in this racing game. And I was just realizing all these kids are driving around with their parents telling them, hey, you need to go to 7-Eleven because it's nearby, and I need to scan this can so I can get more boosters for my game. It actually drove up sales of that energy drink 10% in the first month that the app was out. So I was like, whoa. But that was a more complex use case of actually acting on something. I don't know if I agree with it ethically, but we'll see. They can do what they want with it. What we did with it is we put geofences around our house, and when we got home, it would tell the house that we were home and turn the lights on automatically, and when we left, the lights would turn off, which was pretty fun. And we also took all of the Wikipedia articles that were geocoded, and we put them into a database so that whenever you get near a place that's of interest, it'll pop up an article. So one time when I was walking around Portland, I got an article that said, "World's smallest park is nearby," and gave me the link to the Wikipedia article. I'm like, what the heck? Like, I would have never known this. And so I looked at the Wikipedia entry, and then I went and found this park. And the park is like this little, it's super tiny. So I would have never known that that existed. We took the dark sky API, and we actually were able to get really accurate hyperlocal weather within like 4 blocks. And there's all these like microclimates in Portland, and if you bike, you can't get out in the rain that much. And so it'd say in 5 minutes, it's going to rain hard, and then it's going to rain for 10 minutes, and then it's going to stop. And I would walk outside and be like, yeah, right, it's not going to rain, and then in 5 minutes, for 10 minutes, and then, so that was pretty amazing. And then we started opening this up for developers to play with it, and they made this app called Don't Eat That, which takes all the restaurant inspection scores and tells you what not to eat. They couldn't release it into the store, the restaurants would have been very mad. And then finally, we made a game called Map Attack, which is a real-life Pac-Man game, or like Pac-Man and Risk, where we took geofences and put them on the city streets, and we open up the game on your phone. You get assigned to either a red or blue team, and you have to capture as many points in real life as possible. So these people were running around campus. We debuted this at Stanford University, and people were running 3, 4, 5 miles getting somewhere, not even noticing, and basically being like kids again. We all got lots of exercise. And I put a 50-pointer like up in a construction zone, apparently. I made the map before I had ever been there. And so there are all these people trying to get in this construction zone, and this one guy just like, it's off the map for a while. I was like, oh my gosh, what happened to him? Is he okay? He comes back like half an hour later, and he's like, okay, so you left a 50-pointer in a construction zone, and I couldn't get it, and I was going to win the game. And I said, well, did you get it? Looks like you got it. He said, yeah. So I walked up the construction fence, and I said, hey, and handed the phone to the construction worker, was like, hey, can you just hold this phone here until it says 50 points? And the guy was like, what? And so he did, and he said, oh, 50 points. What are you doing? What is this? And so they had this giant discussion about like, this is the future of da-da-da, and here's what I'm doing. And the construction guy said, you know, in the 15 years I've worked here at Stanford, no one has come up to me and actually talked to me, ever. And he says, everybody just sticks their phones, you know, in their noses, and they don't, you know, they're just too busy to do anything. Like, this is the first time I've seen people play and then like talk to other people. So I was like, wow, that was worth the entire thing. So really happy that was done. You can actually go to mapattack.org and like make your own game. It's a little bit shisty because it's really hard to build this technology. All the devices have to just subscribe to each other in real time on all of the different players' phones and on the web. It's a really hard problem to solve with real-time location. So sometimes it lags. So the whole point behind all of this is that I really wanted to make sure that friction was really reduced in everyday life, and that you could take all that data that you might have stuck in your phone that you've hoarded and make it relevant when filtered by location. Like leaving yourself a note when you get to the airport that says, here's your check-in note with your confirmation code, so that you don't have to dig through your email to get it to it. Or when you're taking public transit, automatically leave yourself a note that says, hey, in 2 blocks, get off the bus. So that you don't have to actually look at the map and look at that tiny blue dot. You can look out the window, and then the phone tells you when you need to get off, so that you can actually do something and pay attention to more things than just a device. So to echo the words of Mark Weiser, the founder of Calm Technology and Ubiquitous Computing in the 70s at Park Research, the best technology I really think is this kind of invisible technology where the interface is more invisible, and that it should just get out of the way and let you live your life and connect people. So no longer this, although that's pretty cool looking, but this. These guys are jumping up, getting 50 pointers in the Map Attack game in an alleyway in Portland, Oregon. And you can't see any of their technology at all. So thank you very much.